He stood in front of the cameras. Millions of people watching. And Patrick Mahomes, the most powerful player in the NFL, opened his mouth and said something that nobody in the league wanted him to say. Not his coach. Not the owners. Not the commissioner. Not even his own team. And once it was out there, it couldn't be taken back. This is the moment that changed everything. Let's go back to sell a story. A jersey. A dream. Think about it. When the NFL wants to show the world how an impossible angle and somehow completing a 40-yard pass while falling backwards. He is the product. So when the product fire for years, we're talking about a long, painful, ugly history of decisions that made a lot of people very uncomfortable. Players getting silenced. Injuries being swept under the rug. Deals made behind closed doors that the public was never supposed to find out about. Referees making calls that had millions of fans screaming at their televisions. Front office decisions that seemed, to put it as politely as possible, a little too convenient for certain outcomes. People talked. Former players talked. Coaches talked. Analysts talked. But here's the thing. When you're still in the league, when you're still playing, when you still have contracts and endorsements and a career on the line, you don't talk. You don't rock the boat. You smile for the cameras, you shake hands, you say the right things in the post-game interview, and you go home. That is the unwritten rule of the NFL. And Patrick Mahomes just broke it. Let's paint the picture of where we are before this moment. Because context is everything. The Kansas City Chiefs have been the most dominant team in football for years. Super Bowl after Super Bowl. Championship after championship. Patrick Mahomes has been to more Super Bowls in his career than most quarterbacks get to in a lifetime. He has rings. He has records. He has a contract worth so much money that even the number itself sounds made up. He is untouchable. And that's exactly why what he said was so explosive. See, when a backup quarterback complains about the NFL, people shrug. When a retired player writes a book about corruption, it gets a chapter on ESPN and then disappears. When a coach grumbles about officiating in a press conference, he gets fined and everyone moves on. But when the king speaks, when the guy the entire league is built around stands up and says something is wrong, you can't ignore that. You can't fine it away. You can't spin it into nothing. Because now it's real. It started during a live television interview. One of those sit-down moments where the cameras are rolling, the host is smiling, and everyone in the room assumes it's going to be a normal, comfortable, promotional conversation. Talk about the upcoming season. Talk about the team chemistry. Maybe say something nice about your receivers. Thank your offensive line. Smile. Laugh. Go home. That was the script everyone expected. But Mahomes walked in that day with something on his mind. Something that had been sitting in his chest for a long time. Something he had clearly wrestled with, because you don't say what he said by accident. You don't stumble into words like that. You choose them. The host asked a question. A simple question. One of those general, open-ended questions about the state of the league. About the future of football. About where things were heading. And Mahomes paused. That pause. That 1 second of silence before he answered. That was the moment. If you watched the interview back, you can see it. His jaw tightens slightly. His eyes shift. And then something changes in his expression. Like a decision being made in real time. And then he spoke. He talked about the players. Specifically, he talked about how the league treats its players when it comes to health and safety, and more importantly, what happens to them when they speak up about it. He said, and I want you to really hear this, he said that players across the league feel like they are not being heard. That there is a system in place that prioritizes the product over the people. That the NFL asks its players to sacrifice everything. Their bodies, their time, their mental health. And in return, the league offers protection that is, at best, incomplete and, at worst, deliberately designed to minimize accountability. He didn't stop there. He kept going. He talked about the way the league handles injury information. About how teams are incentivized, financially incentivized, to keep players on the field even when those players maybe shouldn't be. About how the injury report system, which is supposed to create transparency, has become a tool for confusion rather than clarity. He talked about how young players, kids coming out of college, 21, 22 years old, who have never navigated professional contracts before, get handed deals that look massive on paper but contain clauses that strip away protections they don't even know they're giving up. He talked about the culture of silence, about how players who complain loudly find themselves suddenly in trade rumors, about how agents get quiet phone calls, about how the message is always the same, just delivered in different ways. Stay in line, or find out what happens when you don't. And then, and this is the part that really sent shockwaves through the league, he looked directly into the camera. And he said he was tired of pretending everything was fine when it wasn't. Now stop for a second, because I need you to feel the weight of that. This is not a player at the end of his career with nothing to lose. This is not a journeyman backup trying to get attention. This is not someone who is bitter about being cut or benched or overlooked. This is Patrick Mahomes. Active, healthy, dominant, under contract, at the absolute peak of his power. And he just went on live television and told the world that the NFL has a problem. The phones started ringing before the interview was even over. Let's talk about the reaction. Because the reaction was just as fascinating as the moment itself. The first wave came from the media. Sports journalists who had been waiting for something exactly like this for years. People who had written cautious, carefully worded articles about league controversies suddenly had permission to write the full version. Because if Mahomes is saying it on camera, then it's not a conspiracy theory anymore. It's not a disgruntled former player stirring up drama. It's the face of the franchise, the face of the league, putting his name behind the criticism. Social media exploded. And I mean that in the most literal sense. Clips of the interview were everywhere within minutes. Every platform. Every account. Fans who had been saying these things for years were sharing the video with one word: finally. Current players started reacting. Some carefully, a like here, a retweet there. Enough to signal agreement without fully stepping into the fire. But others went further. A handful of veterans across different teams started coming forward with their own stories. Stories that aligned with what Mahomes had said. Stories that filled in the gaps. Former players who had been quiet for years suddenly found their voices again. But here's where it gets complicated. Because the NFL didn't stay silent either. The league's response was swift. And it was calculated. They didn't attack Mahomes directly. That would have been too obvious, too damaging. You don't come out and publicly fight with your most valuable player. That's not how the machine works. Instead, what happened was more subtle. And in some ways, more chilling. Unnamed sources started appearing in articles. People close to the league began suggesting that Mahomes had been misunderstood. That his words were being taken out of context. That he was frustrated after a difficult stretch of games and had expressed himself in a way that didn't accurately reflect his true feelings about the league. That's the move, right? You don't deny the words. You deny the meaning of the words. You create a fog of uncertainty around something that was, when you actually watch the interview, extremely clear. Mahomes heard what was being said about him. About his interview. About the spin that was being put on his very specific, very deliberate, very measured comments. And he did something the league definitely did not expect. He doubled down. In a follow-up statement, posted directly to his own platforms, bypassing the traditional media filters completely, Mahomes said he stood by everything he said. Word for word. He wasn't misquoted. He wasn't out of context. He meant exactly what he said. And he wasn't going to pretend otherwise just to make people in suits feel more comfortable. That statement broke the internet in a different way than the interview did. Because now it wasn't a moment of passion. Now it was a position. A deliberate, thought-out, public position taken by the most important player in the sport. The narrative that the league was trying to build, that this was a slip, an overreaction, a misunderstanding, collapsed completely. And the real conversation began. Let's step back even further. Because Mahomes didn't arrive at this moment randomly. There was a journey. People forget sometimes that Patrick Mahomes grew up around professional sports. His father was a Major League Baseball pitcher. He watched from the inside what professional leagues do to players. How the money changes things. How the contracts change things. How men who are heroes on the field can become invisible the moment they can no longer perform at the level the organization needs them to. He watched his father navigate that world. And he came into the NFL with eyes that were already a little bit open. Over his career, Mahomes had said things, small things, carefully worded things, that, looking back now, were the early signals of what was coming. Comments about player empowerment. Comments about the importance of players having real voices in negotiations. Comments about the responsibility that comes with being in a leadership position. He was always building toward something. The words he spoke on that broadcast were not the beginning of this story. They were the result of years of watching, learning, and deciding when the right moment was to say what he actually believed. That moment arrived. Now I want to talk about something that a lot of people in the mainstream coverage glossed over. Something that I think is actually the most important part of this entire story. It's not just what Mahomes said. It's what his saying it means for every other player in the league. Think about it from the perspective of a young player. A first-round pick who just signed his rookie contract. He's 22 years old. He has a family. He has people depending on him. He is terrified of doing anything that might jeopardize the career he has worked his entire life to build. The NFL operates on that fear. Consciously or not, the system is built in a way that makes speaking up feel dangerous. And for most players, especially young players, especially players without the financial security or the public profile that Mahomes has, it is dangerous. Or at least it feels that way. Mahomes just made it feel a little less dangerous. Because here's the thing about courage. It's contagious. When someone with everything to lose decides to stand up and say the truth, it gives permission to people with less to lose to do the same. It shifts the culture. It moves the line. What Mahomes did wasn't just personal. It was structural. It was a signal to every player in every locker room across the league that the old rules about what you can and cannot say are changing. Let's talk about the owners for a minute. Because their reaction, or more accurately, the very deliberate nature of their non-reaction, tells you everything you need to know. NFL owners are some of the most powerful business people in the country. They have spent decades building a league that generates revenue at a scale that seems almost impossible. They have relationships with politicians, with media companies, with advertisers. They have leverage that extends far beyond football. And usually, when something threatens the image of the league, those owners are very loud, very united, very quick to respond with a coordinated message. That didn't happen here. Instead, silence, or something close to it. A few vague statements from the league office. A reminder of the processes that exist for players to raise concerns through proper channels. But nothing direct. Nothing that engaged with the substance of what Mahomes actually said. And that silence was loud. Because it suggested something interesting. That even the owners knew that coming out swinging against Mahomes on this particular topic would be a losing battle. That the public would not be on their side. That the optics of billionaire franchise owners attacking their most beloved player for talking about player safety would be catastrophic. So they chose to wait. To let the news cycle move. To hope that the story would fade. It didn't. Here's where we need to talk about something that adds an entirely different dimension to this story. The timing. Because Mahomes didn't make these comments in a vacuum. He made them at a moment when the NFL was already under enormous scrutiny. When conversations about player health were already louder than they had been in years. When a series of high-profile injuries had reignited debates about the physical toll of the game and whether the league was doing enough to protect the people who play it. He made these comments at a moment when the players' union was in the middle of ongoing negotiations about several key issues. When the balance of power between players and owners was being contested in ways that most fans never see. He made these comments at a moment when multiple former players had come forward with stories about their post-football lives, about the health issues, the financial struggles, the feeling of being discarded by an institution they had given everything to. Mahomes knew all of this. He is not an uninformed person. He has advisors. He has a team. He reads. He pays attention. He knew exactly what the backdrop looked like when he sat down for that interview. Which means the timing wasn't an accident. He chose this moment deliberately. Let's slow down right here and really sit with something. There is a version of Patrick Mahomes that could have stayed silent forever. He could have played out his career, won more Super Bowls, broken more records, banked more money. and retired as perhaps the greatest quarterback of all time without ever saying a word that made anyone uncomfortable. He had that option. He chose not to take it. Why? That's the question that I keep coming back to. Because understanding why Mahomes decided to speak, what pushed him from private frustration to public statement, tells you something really important about where we are right now in the history of professional football. I think it comes down to this. There comes a point where staying silent starts to feel like participation. Where keeping your head down and collecting your paycheck starts to feel like you are part of the problem. Where the comfort of your own position stops being enough to justify the silence. Mahomes reached that point. And when he did, he used the only weapon that really matters in situations like this. The truth, said loudly, in public, where nobody could pretend they didn't hear it. Now, the ripple effects. Because this story doesn't end with the interview. Not even close. In the weeks that followed, the conversation about player rights and league accountability reached a level of intensity that hadn't been seen in years. Congressional representatives who had been quietly monitoring the NFL's handling of player safety issues suddenly had a new reason to ask questions publicly. Articles that had been sitting in editors' inboxes, too risky, too controversial, too hard to prove, started getting published. The Players' Union issued a statement that was notable for what it said, but even more notable for its tone. Usually, union statements about player rights are careful, diplomatic, designed to keep negotiations moving without escalating tensions. This one was different. It was direct. It named specific concerns. It used language that left very little room for misinterpretation. That statement read differently after Mahomes' interview. Because now it wasn't just the union talking. It was the union talking with the implicit backing of the biggest name in the sport. Something else happened that I want to make sure you understand, because it flew under the radar in a lot of the mainstream coverage. Other quarterbacks started talking. Not all of them went as far as Mahomes. But across the league, starting quarterbacks, the voices that carry the most weight in any locker room, the players who have the most direct relationship with ownership and management, began adding their voices to the conversation. Carefully. Selectively. But deliberately. Each one of those conversations, each one of those interviews, each one of those social media posts, it added another brick to what Mahomes had started building. And what he started building was a wall of player voices that the league couldn't simply dismiss, spin, or wait out. Because here's the thing about institutions. They can ignore one voice. They can isolate a single critic, discredit them, make their concerns seem personal or petty or driven by something other than genuine principle. But they can't do that when the criticism is coming from everywhere at once. Let's take a moment and talk about the fans. Because throughout all of this, the interviews, the statements, the responses, the ripple effects, the fans have been the most interesting variable of all. NFL fans are a fascinating group of people. They are extraordinarily passionate about their teams. They are fiercely loyal. And in many ways, they have been willing to forgive the league for things that, in any other context, would be unforgivable. Because they love the game. Because Sunday football is woven into the fabric of so many lives, so many families, so many traditions. But there is a growing segment of the fan base that has been quietly uncomfortable for a long time. People who enjoy watching the games, but who have never quite been able to shake a vague, persistent feeling that something about the system isn't right. That the players they love are not being treated the way they deserve to be treated. That the league they invest so much emotional energy into doesn't really care about the people at the center of it. Those fans heard Mahomes. And for them, what he said wasn't shocking. It was confirming. It was the most famous player in football saying out loud what they had been thinking privately for years. And once something is confirmed by someone with that level of credibility, it becomes very hard to go back to not knowing. Here's a question that nobody in the media seemed to want to ask directly, so I'm going to ask it right now. Is the NFL afraid of Patrick Mahomes? Not physically. Not competitively. But institutionally. Does the league, as a system, as a business, as a power structure, does it fear what happens if its biggest star keeps talking? I think the answer is yes. And I think the evidence for that is visible in every carefully calculated non-response the league has given. In the way the PR machine went into overdrive trying to soften the edges of his words without actually confronting them. In the way that conversations about rule changes and player welfare suddenly accelerated after months of stalled progress. When the most valuable asset you have starts telling the public that your house isn't as clean as you've been claiming, you have a choice. You can fight him, which makes you look worse. You can ignore him, which makes you look cowardly. Or you can quietly start addressing the things he pointed out, hope the story fades, and try to prevent it from happening again. The NFL chose option 3. But here's what the NFL doesn't fully understand yet. Option 3 only works when the person who spoke up is willing to move on. When they are satisfied by the gesture, by the appearance of change, by the press release announcing a new committee or a new initiative or a new awareness campaign. Mahomes is not satisfied by press releases. Let's talk about what comes next. Because this story is still unfolding. The conversations that Mahomes ignited are not going away. The players who found their voices in the aftermath of his interview are not going back to silence. The fans who had their suspicions confirmed are not going back to comfortable ignorance. There is a generation of players entering the NFL right now who grew up watching Mahomes, who have idolized him since they were in high school, who are coming into the league with a different set of expectations about what they are owed and what they are willing to accept, who have watched what happened and are already thinking about what it means for them. That generation is the real long-term consequence of this moment. Because right now, today, the NFL can still manage this. It can adjust. It can make enough visible changes to keep the story from getting worse. It can point to progress and ask for patience. But in 5 years, in 10 years, when the locker rooms are full of players who saw Mahomes speak and decided that was the standard, the floor, the minimum of what a player could demand of the institution they play for, the dynamic will be fundamentally different. The NFL will have to reckon with a workforce that no longer operates on silence and fear. A workforce that has seen what happens when you speak the truth and refuse to back down. A workforce that has been shown, by the greatest player of his generation, that using your voice is not only possible, it is powerful. I want to go back to that moment. The pause before he answered. Because I keep thinking about it. That 1 second of silence that changed everything. In that second, Mahomes made a calculation. He weighed what he stood to lose against what he stood to gain. He weighed his own comfort against his own conscience. He weighed the version of himself that stays quiet and protected against the version of himself that says what he actually believes. And then he chose. There is something deeply human about that moment. Something that transcends football. Because all of us, at some point in our lives, face a version of that choice. The moment where saying the true thing costs something. Where honesty is expensive. Where the easy path and the right path are pointed in different directions. Most of the time, most of us take the easy path. Not because we are cowards. But because the cost is real and the risks are real and the system is designed to make the easy path feel like the only sensible option. Mahomes took the harder path. In front of millions of people. With everything on the line. And whether you agree with every word he said or not, whether you think the NFL is corrupt or merely imperfect, whether you think the changes he's calling for are realistic or ambitious, you have to acknowledge that what he did took something rare. It took courage. Let's be honest about something. Some people pushed back on Mahomes. There were voices, fans, analysts, former players even, who argued that he went too far. That he was biting the hand that fed him. That the NFL, for all its flaws, had given him an extraordinary life and maybe some gratitude was in order before the criticism. That this kind of public airing of grievances was unhelpful, divisive, damaging to the sport that so many people love. Those voices deserve to be heard. Because the conversation is not one-sided. But here's what I will say to that perspective. Criticism is not the opposite of gratitude. You can be thankful for what an institution has given you and still believe that institution needs to be better. In fact, the people who care most about something are usually the ones who are most honest about its failures. Because they want it to survive. Because they want it to be worthy of the love that so many people have for it. Mahomes is not trying to destroy the NFL. If anything, the opposite is true. He is trying to hold it to a higher standard because he believes it is capable of meeting that standard. He is making the case that the league can be better, and that being better starts with being honest about where it falls short. That's not an attack. That's a love letter written in uncomfortable language. The last thing I want to say about this, and I want you to really sit with this before we wrap up, is about what this moment means beyond football. We live in a time when a lot of institutions are being forced to confront the gap between what they say they stand for and what they actually do. When the people at the top of those institutions are being held accountable by voices they can no longer ignore. When the old playbook, control the narrative, manage the message, wait for the story to die, is becoming less and less effective. Patrick Mahomes standing up on live television and telling the truth about something uncomfortable is part of that larger story. It's a chapter in a very long book about power and accountability and what happens when the people inside a system refuse to pretend anymore. And here's the thing about moments like this. They matter not because of what changes immediately, because real change is always slow, always contested, always harder than it looks. They matter because of what they make possible. Because of the conversations they start. Because of the people they inspire. Every player who watched that interview and felt something shift inside them. Every young kid who saw one of their heroes refuse to stay silent. Every fan who sat up a little straighter and thought, he's right, and someone finally said it. Every journalist who picked up a story they might have let go before. All of those moments, they come from this moment. They grow out of this moment. They are made possible by this moment. Patrick Mahomes went on live TV. He said something that the NFL did not want him to say. He looked into the camera and told the truth. And nothing, not the spin, not the silence, not the careful management of the story in the days and weeks that followed, nothing can put that truth back in the box. The words are out. The conversation has started. And the NFL will never be quite the same. That's the thing about the most powerful moments in sports. They're never really about sports. They're about people. About power. About what happens when someone who could stay comfortable chooses to be honest instead. Mahomes had every reason to stay quiet. He had rings. He had money. He had the kind of legacy already secured that most players only dream about. He could have coasted. He could have kept his head down, kept cashing checks, kept shaking hands and smiling for cameras. He didn't. And years from now, when people look back at the history of professional football, at the long, complicated, evolving relationship between the players and the machine they play inside, this moment will be there. This interview will be there. The pause before the answer. The decision made in real time. The truth, said out loud, in front of the whole world. Patrick Mahomes didn't just play the game. He changed it. And that, more than any Super Bowl, more than any record, more than any highlight reel throw from an impossible angle, that is the legacy that will last.